Jamal pressed his small hand against the hospital room window, watching billionaire Theodore Wright sob over his unconscious son. 3 doctors confirmed Jackson Wright had 72 hours left. No one noticed the homeless black boy who'd snuck past security, carrying the one thing that could save the dying child. Before we dive deeper into this incredible story, take a moment to tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you believe that sometimes miracles come from the most unexpected places. Now let's discover how 2 children from completely different worlds were about to change everything. Theodore Wright was not a man accustomed to failure. The ruthless real estate billionaire had built an empire throughout Boston, his name emblazoned on skyscrapers and luxury developments across the city skyline. From his fortified mansion perched in the exclusive Beacon Hill neighborhood, Theodore commanded his business empire with cold precision, while raising his 8-year-old son Jackson in isolated luxury. The boy wanted for nothing material but lacked the one thing money could never buy: true companionship. Theodore employed an army of nannies, tutors, and security personnel to ensure Jackson received the finest education and protection money could buy. But the boy remained painfully lonely in his gilded cage. The Wright family world shattered one crisp autumn morning when Jackson collapsed during his private tennis lesson, his small body convulsing while his skin turned an alarming shade of gray. Within hours, specialists delivered the devastating diagnosis, an ultra-rare blood disorder requiring a specialized bone marrow transplant. For perhaps the first time in his adult life, Theodore Wright faced an obstacle his immense fortune couldn't simply bulldoze away. Despite mobilizing his vast network of connections, calling in favors from hospital board members, and offering obscene amounts of money to medical researchers, the prognosis remained grim. Finding a compatible donor in time seemed virtually impossible. Across town in the Roxbury neighborhood, 8-year-old Jamal Davis huddled beneath a threadbare blanket in an abandoned building he now called home. Since his grandmother died last month from untreated pneumonia because the local clinic had turned her away, Jamal had been surviving on his own, invisible to a system designed to overlook children who looked like him. Each day followed the same desperate pattern, collecting bottles and cans from dawn until dusk, carefully avoiding certain neighborhoods where residents frequently called police on the small black child they deemed suspicious. Jamal had developed an intimate knowledge of which shopkeepers would allow him to use their bathrooms and which would threaten to call security the moment he approached. He knew precisely which dumpsters might contain discarded food that was still safe to eat, and which public buildings offered warmth during Boston's increasingly cold nights. What Jamal didn't know was that Theodore Wright's company had been responsible for demolishing his former apartment building just 6 months earlier, displacing his entire community to make way for luxury condominiums that none of the previous residents could possibly afford. While surviving on the streets, Jamal battled another invisible enemy, a mysterious medical condition, causing frequent, sometimes severe nosebleeds that left him lightheaded and weak. Without money for treatment or an adult to advocate for him, the boy simply pressed wadded newspaper against his nostrils and waited for the bleeding to stop, unaware that his blood contained something extraordinary. Fate brought the 2 boys into brief proximity during a high-profile charity event where Theodore reluctantly made an appearance to donate a carefully calculated sum that would maximize publicity while minimizing actual financial impact. Jamal had slipped into the event hoping to collect discarded cans from trash bins, wearing his cleanest torn shirt and attempting to remain unnoticed among the wealthy attendees. Jackson, bored by the adult conversations surrounding him, spotted Jamal ducking behind a decorative plant and approached with innocent curiosity. For precious minutes, the boys connected over their shared love of space exploration and comic book superheroes, neither aware of the vast socio-economic chasm separating their worlds. The magical moment ended abruptly when Theodore spotted his son chatting animatedly with the disheveled black child. He yanked Jackson away with unnecessary force, his voice cold as he warned, "We don't mix with those kinds of people, Jackson. They're nothing but trouble." The confusion and hurt in Jackson's eyes haunted Jamal as he slipped away from the event, clutching his meager collection of recyclables. Only later did he discover a treasure among them, a rare commemorative coin that had fallen from Jackson's pocket during their interrupted conversation. Jamal kept the gleaming coin as his most valued possession, running his fingers over its polished surface during particularly difficult nights. That very evening, as Theodore was lecturing his son about appropriate social boundaries, Jackson collapsed in their mansion's grand foyer, his small body crumpling onto imported marble tiles. Frantic household staff called for the family's private physician, while Theodore cradled his unconscious son. The mighty billionaire suddenly transformed into nothing more than a terrified father. Within the hour, Jackson was rushed to Boston Memorial Hospital, his condition deteriorating rapidly, despite the best emergency interventions. Theodore pulled every string available, demanding the hospital's top specialists, while offering millions for a cure, his voice breaking as he held his son's increasingly frail hand. For once, Theodore Wright was experiencing the terror of absolute powerlessness that so many less fortunate parents face daily, the realization that some things remain stubbornly beyond purchase, no matter how vast one's fortune. Boston Memorial's most prestigious medical team assembled in Jackson's private suite, their expressions grave as they delivered the diagnosis to Theodore. Chief among them was Dr. Vanessa Richards, the hospital's leading hematologist, who explained with clinical precision that Jackson suffered from accelerated myeloid deterioration syndrome, an exceptionally rare condition affecting fewer than 50 people worldwide. The team of specialists presented their findings with methodical detachment, while Theodore's face contorted in disbelief. AMDS attacked the bone marrow aggressively, causing rapid deterioration of the blood's ability to carry oxygen and fight infection. Dr. Richards removed her glasses, her professional demeanor softening slightly, as she delivered the devastating prognosis without standard treatment. Jackson had 72 hours before complete system failure. Theodore slammed his fist against the wall, demanding alternatives, treatments, experimental procedures, anything that money could buy. Dr. Richards explained that only one potential intervention existed. A bone marrow transplant from a donor with highly specific genetic markers could potentially reset Jackson's immune system, but the probability of finding such a match within the critical time frame was vanishingly small. Theodore immediately launched a nationwide search, dispatching private jets to transport potential donors from across the country for testing. He established a command center in an adjacent hospital room, surrounded by assistants, coordinating with medical facilities nationwide, while offering increasingly extravagant financial incentives for anyone who might save his son. The hospital's security chief, Walter Jenkins, established unprecedented protocols around Jackson's wing, treating the area like a private fortress. A former military contractor with rigid views and barely concealed racial prejudices, Walter personally vetted every individual entering the secure area, turning away anyone he deemed suspicious or undesirable. Meanwhile, across the city, Jamal found himself caught in a sudden autumn downpour while collecting recyclables. Soaked to the skin and shivering violently, the boy sought shelter in the first available building, Boston Memorial Hospital's expansive lobby. No sooner had he stepped through the automatic doors, leaving puddles on the polished floor, than hospital staff began eyeing him suspiciously. A registration clerk approached, asking with thinly veiled impatience if he needed emergency care or was meeting a relative. When Jamal explained he only wanted to stay dry until the rain stopped, security was promptly called. Walter Jenkins himself responded to the call, his imposing frame casting a shadow over the dripping child. He grabbed Jamal roughly by the shoulder fingers, digging into the boy's thin arm as he sneered, "We don't need another drug addict's kid loitering around here. Out you go back to whatever alley you crawled from." The confrontation might have ended with Jamal back in the downpour, if not for Miguel Rodriguez, a kind-hearted janitor who intervened with quiet dignity. "The boy is just getting out of the rain, Mr. Jenkins. Hospital policy says the lobby is open to the public. I'll keep an eye on him." Walter released Jamal with obvious reluctance, leaning down to whisper a final warning. "One wrong move, kid, and you're out permanently. This isn't a homeless shelter." Miguel offered Jamal a clean towel and directed him to a corner chair near the radiator, bringing him a cup of hot chocolate from the cafeteria when his supervisor wasn't looking. Grateful for the unexpected kindness, Jamal remained perfectly still, trying to become invisible as he had learned to do on the streets. As the boy's clothes slowly dried, he overheard fragments of conversation between passing medical staff discussing the billionaire's son on the top floor and his rare blood condition. The words triggered a memory of his grandmother, who had participated in a medical study years ago focused on rare blood conditions. She had often told Jamal their bloodline was special, carrying unique properties that researchers found fascinating. She'd spoken of healing abilities and genetic mutations that scientists couldn't fully explain, though Jamal had dismissed these stories as the fantasies of an aging mind. As Jamal pondered these memories, his nose began bleeding again, more severely than usual. He fumbled for tissues from a nearby dispenser, but crimson droplets spilled onto the hospital floor before he could stem the flow. A passing hospital intern noticed the unusual pattern of Jamal's blood spatter on the white tile, bright red with unusual golden flecks that caught the fluorescent lighting in a way typical blood would not. Curiosity piqued the intern knelt beside Jamal, offering proper gauze for his nose while surreptitiously collecting a small sample of the spilled blood on a sterile swab, telling the boy she needed to clean the floor properly. The sample was casually dropped at the lab with a request to check for anything unusual without formal documentation. Hours later, preliminary lab results flagged Jamal's blood for abnormal antibody structures and extraordinary regenerative properties, but the findings were temporarily misplaced when Theodore Wright caused an uproar in the laboratory, demanding immediate results from all donor tests and disrupting the entire department's workflow. As night fell, Jamal's nosebleed finally stopped, and with the storm past, Miguel gently suggested it was time for the boy to leave. Jamal thanked the janitor for his kindness and slipped back into the darkness of Boston's streets, unaware that his blood sample remained in the hospital system, a medical anomaly waiting to be rediscovered. Back in Jackson's private suite, the first day of his 72-hour prognosis ended with no compatible donors, identified his small body growing weaker as the specialized medical equipment beeped a steady countdown to what seemed increasingly inevitable. The morning news broadcasted Theodore Wright's ashen face as he announced a $50 million reward for anyone providing a compatible bone marrow donation for his son. The press conference, hastily organized in the hospital's media room, showcased the billionaire's rarely seen emotional side as he openly wept while cameras captured every tear. "No amount of money matters compared to my son's life," Theodore declared, his voice breaking with apparent anguish. Yet the moment the cameras stopped rolling, his demeanor transformed back to cold calculation, barking orders at hospital staff and threatening to ruin careers if progress wasn't made immediately. Only Dr. Richards noticed this jarring transformation, raising private concerns about Theodore's psychological state. Those who had worked with Theodore for years remembered similar behavior during his meteoric rise in real estate development. How he demonstrated compassion publicly while privately orchestrating the displacement of entire communities. Rumors had long circulated about Jackson's mother's mysterious disappearance years earlier, with some former household staff whispering about Theodore's controlling and occasionally abusive treatment before she vanished from AG's dens. Public life. No charges were ever filed, and Theodore's army of attorneys had buried any inquiries beneath mountains of legal threats. As donor matches continued to prove fruitless, Theodore's business partner arrived with a morally questionable suggestion: whispered conversations about buying potential donors from questionable sources in developing countries, circumventing legal protocols through financial inducement. Theodore didn't immediately reject the proposition, instructing his partner to explore all options while maintaining plausible deniability. Across the city, in a dilapidated public library, Jamal watched the same press conference on a community computer, instantly recognizing Theodore as the man who destroyed our homes. The boy's fists clenched involuntarily as he recalled his grandmother's tears when their apartment building was condemned to make way for luxury condominiums. The eviction had directly contributed to her declining health, as stress and substandard housing exacerbated her respiratory condition. Jamal felt the familiar, warm trickle of another nosebleed beginning, but ignored it as he focused on the image of Jackson in the hospital bed behind his father. Despite everything, he felt a strange connection to the other boy, remembering their brief, friendly interaction at the charity event. Back at Boston Memorial, the laboratory finally processed Jamal's misplaced blood sample, with results reaching Dr. Richards' desk amid hundreds of donor screening reports. The doctor froze in disbelief as she reviewed the findings. The anonymous sample showed extraordinary compatibility markers with Jackson's rare condition. The lab report indicated the blood contained unique antibodies that could potentially neutralize Jackson's aggressive syndrome, possibly bypassing the need for a traditional bone marrow transplant altogether. These antibodies demonstrated regenerative properties unlike anything in medical literature. Dr. Richards immediately ordered an all-hospital search for an unidentified black male child who had provided the sample, but with no formal intake documentation. Locating the potential donor proved challenging. Hospital security footage had captured only grainy images of the boy in the lobby. Meanwhile, unaware of his medical importance, Jamal returned to the hospital seeking a bathroom and brief warmth during another cold day of collecting recyclables. Walter Jenkins spotted him immediately, remembering their previous encounter, and launching an aggressive pursuit through the hospital corridors, calling for backup on his radio with descriptions laced with racial coding. Terrified but resourceful, Jamal ducked into a maintenance closet where he discovered an access panel to the building's extensive air duct system. Drawing on survival skills honed from months of finding shelter in abandoned buildings, the boy navigated the narrow metal pathways, crawling toward the sound of quieter, more sophisticated medical equipment that he guessed indicated private rooms. Through a ceiling vent, Jamal gazed down into a luxurious private suite where Jackson Wright lay pale and motionless, connected to numerous monitors and IV lines. The billionaire's son looked far younger and more vulnerable than during their brief meeting, his skin nearly translucent against the pristine white sheets. As if sensing someone's presence, Jackson's eyes fluttered open, gaze drifting upward until he made momentary eye contact with Jamal through the vent grating. A ghost of recognition passed over Jackson's face before Walter and his security team burst into the maintenance shaft, grabbing Jamal roughly and dragging him from his hiding place. "Got the trespasser," Walter announced triumphantly over his radio, twisting Jamal's arm painfully while calling him a thief and potential kidnapper. The commotion attracted Theodore Wright himself, who arrived just as Jamal, struggling against Walter's grip, dropped the commemorative coin he'd treasured since the charity event. The golden disc clattered against the hospital floor, spinning briefly before settling at Theodore's polished shoes. The billionaire recognized it instantly as the rare collectible he'd given Jackson on his last birthday. "Where did you get this?" Theodore demanded, fury building in his voice. "Did you steal from my son?" Jamal attempted to explain about the charity event and how he'd found the coin, but Theodore cut him off with a dismissive gesture. "I remember you now, the street rat talking to Jackson at the fundraiser." "Throw this criminal out," he ordered Walter, "and make sure he never enters this hospital again." Dr. Richards arrived breathlessly, just as Walter was escorting Jamal toward the exit, catching only a glimpse of the small boy before he was forced outside. The first full day of Jackson's 72-hour prognosis ended with his condition noticeably deteriorating, vital signs weakening despite the best available supportive care. Meanwhile, Jamal returned to his makeshift shelter in the abandoned building, nursing bruises from Walter's rough handling, while wondering about the strange coincidence that had connected him twice now to the dying billionaire's son. Do you believe in fate bringing people together for a purpose? Comment number 1. If you think Jamal and Jackson's connection is more than coincidence, or number 2, if you think their paths crossing is just random chance. Like this video if you've ever witnessed an unexpected friendship form between people from completely different backgrounds. Subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories about bridges built across social divides. Will Theodore's prejudice prevent him from finding the cure right under his nose? Can Dr. Sason's, end quote. Richards discovered Jamal's identity before it's too late. And why does Jamal's blood contain these mysterious healing properties? Stay tuned as we uncover more shocking truths in this extraordinary journey. Dawn broke over Boston, with Jamal already attempting to return to the hospital, his young mind fixated on the pale boy he'd glimpsed through the vent. Something instinctive told him their connection mattered, though he couldn't articulate why. This time, Jamal approached the hospital's public entrance, directly explaining to the receptionist that he wanted to help the sick boy from the news. His honesty proved ineffective against newly implemented security protocols. Hospital staff immediately recognized him from the alert created after yesterday's incident. Walter Jenkins had created a detailed security profile labeled Potential Threat Homeless Black Juvenile, with instructions to deny entry and contact security immediately if the subject attempted to return. Every hospital entrance now required identification, with security personnel turning away anyone deemed suspicious based on criteria that seemed to target individuals of color disproportionately. Jamal tried multiple entrances throughout the morning, facing increasing hostility and thinly veiled discrimination with each attempt. One security guard threatened to call police and have him placed in juvenile detention for criminal trespassing if he didn't leave the premises immediately. Inside the hospital, Theodore Wright's desperate efforts to save his son grew increasingly frantic and ethically questionable. He brought in specialists from across the country, via private jet, bribing officials to bypass standard donor protocols and offering millions to expedite testing processes typically bound by rigid medical guidelines. Theodore's attorneys drafted liability waivers for experimental treatments not yet approved for pediatric patients, while his financial team prepared unprecedented compensation packages for any medical professional willing to bend rules to save Jackson. Meanwhile, Dr. Richards discovered through lab records that the extraordinary blood sample showing compatibility with Jackson's condition had come from a homeless child ejected from the hospital the previous day. When she brought this information to Theodore, explaining the remarkable antibody profile and potential for treatment, the billionaire dismissed the possibility outright with naked prejudice. "No street rat has anything my son needs," Theodore spat, pounding his fist on the conference table. "Find a proper donor, someone clean, someone appropriate. I want the best for my son, not some contaminated blood from the gutter." His words hung in the air as the medical team exchanged uncomfortable glances, none brave enough to challenge the man whose donations had built entire hospital wings. As the second day progressed, Jackson's condition deteriorated further, his organs showing signs of stress from the aggressive syndrome. Dr. Richards updated the prognosis to 48 hours remaining before complete system failure, privately wondering if their best hope had been literally thrown out of the hospital. That afternoon, Jamal found another way into the facility, through an unmonitored basement delivery entrance, timing his entry between supply trucks and slipping past distracted loading dock workers. Once inside, he navigated the service corridors, using his street-honed instinct for avoiding detection, searching for familiar landmarks from his previous visit. Miguel Rodriguez discovered Jamal hiding behind a linen cart, the janitor's surprise quickly transforming to concern when he saw the boy's determined expression. In a quiet supply closet, Jamal explained his grandmother's stories about their special blood and his strange certainty that he could somehow help the dying boy upstairs. Miguel initially responded with skepticism, but was moved by Jamal's unwavering determination. The janitor shared his own painful history with medical discrimination, how his daughter had been denied prompt treatment at another hospital years earlier, staff assuming the family lacked insurance despite his full-time employment and coverage. By the time they received proper attention, his daughter's condition had worsened beyond treatment. "The system isn't made for people like us," Miguel explained, with quiet resignation. "But sometimes we have to fight it anyway." While Jamal and Miguel spoke, Dr. Richards conducted further analysis of the mysterious blood sample, confirming it contained unique regenerative properties, unlike anything in current medical literature. The antibodies demonstrated an extraordinary ability to neutralize the exact pathological markers present in Jackson's syndrome. She prepared a comprehensive report detailing the potential treatment pathway, only to discover Theodore had brought in controversial specialist Dr. Gregory Phillips, known for experimental treatments with limited peer review but extensive publicity. Dr. Phillips confidently presented an alternative treatment protocol with only 20% success rate involving aggressive chemotherapy followed by synthetic stem cell introduction. Theodore agreed without hesitation, ignoring established medical protocols in favor of a long-shot treatment from a doctor, notorious for courting wealthy, desperate clients. When Dr. Richards objected, citing the overlooked donor match that showed greater promise, Theodore threatened her position at the hospital if she delayed the experimental procedure. The hospital administrators, mindful of Theodore's financial influence, pressured Dr. Richards to cooperate despite her medical reservations. The experimental treatment began that evening with Jamal having found a hiding place in an adjacent supply room where he could observe through a small window. Within minutes of the treatment starting, Jackson's body reacted violently, monitors blaring as his vital signs crashed precipitously. Medical staff rushed to stabilize the boy as Dr. Phillips made hasty excuses about expected adjustment periods and temporary reactions. Dr. Richards countermanded Dr. Phillips' orders, implementing emergency protocols that gradually stabilized Jackson. But the damage had been done. The failed treatment had further weakened the boy's system, accelerating his decline. As the second day ended, the medical team delivered the grim update that Jackson would not survive another failed treatment attempt. His remaining time had shortened further, his small body ravaged by both disease and misguided intervention. Dr. Richards found Theodore slumped in a chair beside his son's bed, the powerful billionaire reduced to a hollow shell of his former commanding presence. For a brief moment she considered appealing to his humanity again about the potential donor, but Theodore's earlier words echoed in her mind, reminding her that even his son's impending death hadn't shaken the deep-seated prejudice that blinded him to their best remaining hope. The hospital corridors grew quieter as night deepened, with only essential medical staff remaining on Jackson's floor. Jamal approached Miguel with a desperate plan to reach Jackson, directly convinced by both instinct and his grandmother's teachings that he held the key to saving the dying boy. The janitor listened intently, conflict evident in his expression as he weighed his employment against what might be a child's last chance at survival. After lengthy consideration, Miguel made his decision, retrieving hospital floor plans from a maintenance office and marking security camera locations and guard rotations. "If you're caught, I never helped you," he whispered, slipping Jamal a spare access card. But sometimes doing right means breaking rules. As Jamal prepared for his attempt, his own health noticeably deteriorated, nosebleeds becoming more frequent and lasting longer. Each episode left him progressively weaker, though he hid the symptoms from Miguel, not wanting to jeopardize the plan. During quiet moments waiting for optimal timing, Jamal recalled fragmented memories of his grandmother participating in a medical trial years earlier at this very hospital. She described researchers' fascination with their family's blood composition, though the study had ended abruptly when funding disappeared. Inside Jackson's private wing, Theodore's mental state deteriorated alongside his son's physical condition. The billionaire developer fired 3 nurses for perceived inadequacies and threatened hospital administration with legal action for failing to produce results. His behavior grew increasingly erratic, paranoid accusations alternating with periods of catatonic despair as he watched his son slip away despite the fortune being spent to save him. Dr. Richards worked tirelessly behind the scenes, attempting to locate the missing donor whose blood sample showed such promise. Her efforts met systematic resistance from hospital administration, unwilling to risk Theodore's displeasure by pursuing a treatment pathway he had explicitly rejected. Executives cited potential liability issues and questioned the ethics of involving a homeless minor without guardian consent, though their concerns transparently masked fear of losing their wealthiest benefactor's financial support. Walter Jenkins doubled security around Jackson's floor, implementing unofficial racial profiling measures to keep out undesirables who might exploit the situation. Staff members with darker complexions found themselves subjected to additional identification checks, while white visitors passed with minimal scrutiny. Several hospital employees filed complaints about Walter's discriminatory practices, only to have their concerns buried by administrators unwilling to confront the security chief during a high-profile case. Shortly after midnight, Jamal executed his plan using clothes from a children's ward donation bin to disguise himself as a patient. With Miguel's access card and carefully memorized directions, he navigated through service corridors during shift changes when security attention wavered. Reaching Jackson's floor required avoiding 3 security checkpoints and numerous cameras utilizing air ducts and maintenance shafts where necessary. Every step required calculations no child should need to make about which security personnel might view his race as inherently suspicious. After nearly 2 hours of careful movement, Jamal achieved what hospital administrators had deemed impossible: direct access to Jackson Wright's room without detection. The billionaire's son lay motionless, except for shallow breathing, his skin nearly translucent against white sheets. Monitors displayed declining vital signs, while expensive equipment attempted to compensate for failing biological systems. Hearing approaching footsteps, Jamal slipped behind medical equipment just as a nurse completed routine checks and departed. When silence returned, Jamal emerged from hiding and gently touched Jackson's hand. The contact seemed to register even in semi-consciousness. Jackson's eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then widening with recognition. "You're the boy from the party," Jackson whispered voice, barely audible. "And the ceiling. Are you real or am I dreaming?" Jamal nodded, explaining in hushed tones that he'd come to help, though he couldn't explain exactly how. For the next hour, as medical staff focused on a crisis in another room, the boys talked intermittently, Jamal sharing stories of street survival, while Jackson listened with fascination. Despite his weakened state, Jackson smiled for the first time in days, asking questions about experiences entirely foreign to his privileged existence. "Dad says people like you are dangerous," Jackson confided with childlike directness. "But you're the only real friend I've ever had." Jackson described his lonely existence in their mansion, surrounded by staff, but isolated from genuine connection. Despite limitless material possessions he envied children, he observed playing freely together in parks his father deemed unsuitable. The conversation paused when Jackson's monitoring equipment registered improved vitals, triggering a remote alert. In the adjacent room, Theodore conducted a heated argument with a hospital board member, unwittingly revealing corrupt business practices that had helped secure his real estate empire. "We've paid off inspectors before," Theodore hissed. "Find someone who can expedite this donor-matching process. Everyone has a price." The conversation abruptly ended when Theodore's phone chimed with the alert from Jackson's room. As Jamal prepared to retreat, Walter Jenkins appeared in the doorway, alerted by security systems, showing anomalous improvements in Jackson's condition. The security chief initiated an immediate lockdown, cornering Jamal as the boy attempted to escape through an adjacent bathroom. "No one will believe street trash over me." Walter threatened, grabbing Jamal with unnecessary force. "Breaking in to rob a dying kid, this is your last mistake." The commotion drew attention from the medical floor, including Dr. Richards, who arrived to witness Walter's excessive physical restraint of Jamal. When she attempted to intervene, Walter claimed the boy had attempted to disconnect Jackson's medical equipment, an obvious lie contradicted by the monitoring system, showing improvement rather than distress. Fortunately, hospital security cameras had captured Walter's brutality, providing Dr. Richards leverage to demand his immediate suspension pending investigation. Despite this intervention, the damage was already done. Jamal sustained injuries from Walter's rough handling and was escorted from the hospital by reluctant security personnel following established protocols. As Theodore returned to his son's room, Jackson asked weakly for his friend, describing Jamal's visit with animation that had been absent for days. Theodore dismissed the account as a fever-induced hallucination, though Jackson insisted with unusual determination that the other boy had made him feel better just by talking. Something in his son's conviction gave Theodore momentary pause, though not enough to overcome decades of ingrained prejudice. Outside the hospital, Dr. Richards located Jamal sitting on a park bench, shoulders slumped in defeat. After confirming they weren't observed, She revealed the truth: his blood contained antibodies that could potentially save Jackson. The doctor explained the science in simplified terms, describing how sometimes rare genetic variations created medical miracles. Without explicitly requesting his help, given the ethical implications of involving a minor without guardian consent, she merely presented the facts, allowing Jamal to draw his own conclusions. "Nobody deserves to die just 'cause grown-ups are stupid." Jamal responded with wisdom beyond his years, agreeing to help despite the personal risk. As the third day of Jackson's prognosis began, only 24 hours remained before the point of no return, and his vital signs continued their steady decline despite the brief improvement during Jamal's visit. Dr. Richards made the ethically complex decision to arrange preliminary testing for Jamal at a discreet clinic operated by a former colleague, circumventing normal protocols without officially violating hospital regulations. The doctor justified her actions as medical necessity given the rapidly diminishing time frame for intervention. Comprehensive blood analysis confirmed what the initial sample had suggested. Jamal possessed an extremely rare antibody profile that perfectly matched Jackson's requirements, a coincidence so statistically improbable it bordered on miraculous. Further investigation into medical records revealed Jamal's grandmother had indeed been a pioneering participant in experimental immunotherapy research a decade earlier, though the promising program lost funding when pharmaceutical companies couldn't identify profitable applications. The genetic markers that made her blood special had concentrated further in Jamal, creating an unprecedented immune response profile. Armed with irrefutable scientific evidence, Dr. Richards presented the anonymized results to Theodore, strategically omitting details about the donor's identity while emphasizing the perfect compatibility markers and treatment potential. Theodore's response shattered any lingering hope that scientific fact might overcome prejudice. "My son will not have some ghetto dweller's blood contaminating his veins," he declared, dismissing the detailed medical findings without even reviewing them. "Find another way." His rejection came as Jackson's condition reached critical stage, multiple organs beginning systematic shutdown despite aggressive intervention. The medical team privately acknowledged they had exhausted conventional options, watching helplessly as monitoring equipment documented the boy's decline with clinical precision. That evening, when Theodore believed himself unobserved, the facade of controlled determination crumbled completely. Security cameras captured him sobbing beside his son's bed, revealing deep-seated guilt about years of neglect. "I should have been there more," he whispered to his unconscious child. "All those business trips, all those missed birthdays. I thought there would be time later." The vulnerability displayed in this private moment contrasted sharply with his public persona, suggesting the cold exterior might mask a more complex relationship with his son than anyone suspected. Meanwhile, the hospital ethics committee convened an emergency session to discuss Jackson's case, specifically the identified donor match versus the experimental treatments Theodore continued to demand. The debate grew heated as committee members weighed medical evidence against the practical reality of defying their wealthiest benefactor. Dr. Richards passionately advocated following medical evidence rather than capitulating to prejudice, while administrators emphasized potential legal liability and donor consent complications. The deadlocked committee ultimately deferred to parental authority, unwilling to challenge Theodore's decisions, despite clear medical indications they were not in his son's best interest. During this institutional paralysis, Miguel helped Jamal create a simple video message for Jackson using the janitor's personal phone. The message contained no medical information, just Jamal sharing encouragement and a few jokes they'd exchanged during their brief meeting. Miguel smuggled the tablet into Jackson's room during his evening cleaning rotation, placing it within reach of the semi-conscious boy with simple instructions on how to play the message. Jackson discovered the tablet shortly after regaining consciousness during a brief lucid period. His weakened fingers managed to activate the video, bringing Jamal's encouraging message to life beside his hospital bed. The effect was immediate and measurable. Monitors registered strengthened vital signs and improved neurological response as Jackson smiled at his newfound friend's words. The brief improvement in Jackson's condition proved temporary but significant medical staff, noting the anomalous strengthening despite his overall decline. The moment ended abruptly when Theodore entered unexpectedly, discovering the unauthorized tablet displaying Jamal's video message. Fury overtook the billionaire as he recognized the boy from previous confrontations. Theodore snatched the device and smashed it against the wall in an uncontrolled rage, fragments of circuitry scattering across the private suite's floor. The violent outburst roused Jackson from his semi-conscious state, witnessing his father's reaction with newfound clarity. For the first time in his young life, Jackson openly defied his father. "You hate Jamal because he's poor," and Black the dying boy stated with surprising strength, "But he's my friend, the only real one I have." Theodore froze, stunned by both the coherent defiance and the uncomfortable truth it contained. Something shifted in his expression as he looked at his son, seeing not an extension of his legacy, but an independent person with moral clarity. He himself had lost somewhere in his ruthless ascent to wealth and power. The confrontation was interrupted by breaking news alerts across hospital television screens. An anonymous source had leaked information about a billionaire rejecting a viable donor match for his dying son due to racial prejudice. Theodore watched in horror as carefully crafted public relations crumbled under the first wave of what would soon become overwhelming public scrutiny. Within hours, social media platforms exploded with the story amateur investigators connecting Theodore Wright to previous discriminatory business practices and questionable development projects that had disproportionately displaced communities of color. His carefully maintained reputation began unraveling as journalists uncovered court records from discrimination lawsuits settled with non-disclosure agreements, former employees speaking anonymously about workplace racial disparities, and community organizers documenting systematic harassment of minority residents who refused to sell properties in gentrifying neighborhoods. While public opinion turned against Theodore, Jamal attempted once more to reach the hospital, his own condition noticeably deteriorating. The boy collapsed on a public bus halfway to the medical center, alarming fellow passengers who called emergency services. First responders transported an unconscious Jamal to Boston Memorial's emergency department, the very hospital that had repeatedly ejected him, now admitting him as a critical patient without recognizing his significance. Initial examination revealed alarming blood abnormalities requiring specialized hematology consultation, coincidentally bringing Dr. Richards into direct contact with the boy she'd been searching for. As Dr. Yusek Talpler Deshan Noun, Richards reviewed Jamal's test results alongside Jackson's comprehensive file. She discovered a medical twist, so unexpected it defied conventional understanding. Both boys suffered from genetically related conditions functioning as mirror images of each other. Where Jackson's blood failed to produce vital components, Jamal's overproduced them to detrimental effect. The nosebleeds plaguing Jamal resulted from excessive production of the very compounds Jackson's body desperately needed. Further analysis suggested an unprecedented treatment possibility. A carefully orchestrated blood component exchange might benefit both children simultaneously, potentially saving 2 lives through one revolutionary procedure. With only 12 hours remaining in Jackson's prognosis, Dr. Eversix Richards faced her greatest ethical challenge, presenting a treatment that could save the billionaire's son while revealing the donor was the very child he had repeatedly rejected. Have you ever witnessed someone's prejudice prevent them from receiving help they desperately needed? Comment number 1. If you think Theodore will finally overcome his racism to save his son. Or number 2, if you believe pride will blind him until it's too late. Like this video, if you believe every child deserves equal medical care regardless of their background or circumstances. Subscribe to see more stories about ordinary heroes who challenge systems of inequality. What sacrifice might Jamal need to make to save a boy whose father despises him? Will Theodore's public disgrace force him to confront his deeply rooted prejudice, and what consequences await Walter Jenkins for his discriminatory security practices? The clock continues ticking down to 0 hour as we continue this extraordinary story of courage versus prejudice. By morning, Boston Memorial Hospital found itself at the epicenter of a media firestorm. News vans clogged surrounding streets while protesters gathered in the parking lot carrying signs condemning healthcare discrimination and wealth inequality. Inside, hospital administrators navigated the impossible position between Theodore Wright's formidable financial influence and mounting public outrage. The hospital's public relations team crafted carefully worded statements about following standard protocols and respecting patient privacy while avoiding substantive responses to accusations of systemic discrimination. On the pediatric floor, Dr. Richards reviewed Jamal's test results with growing concern. The boy's condition, previously manageable through his body's natural compensation mechanisms, had accelerated rapidly due to stress and inadequate nutrition. Without intervention, Jamal faced potential organ damage from his body's overproduction of specialized blood components. The cruel irony became increasingly clear: both boys were dying from opposite sides of the same medical coin. After consulting with leading hematologists nationwide, Dr. E. Richards developed a revolutionary dual treatment protocol that could potentially save both children simultaneously. The procedure would temporarily connect aspects of their circulatory systems, allowing Jamal's excess production to supplement Jackson's deficiency, while specialized medications would help regulate Jamal's overactive immune response. No such procedure had ever been attempted, but theoretical models showed promising potential for success. With the treatment plan developed, Dr. Richards faced her greatest challenge, presenting the option to Theodore Wright, while revealing Jamal's identity as the compatible donor. She requested an emergency ethics committee meeting, ensuring hospital leadership would witness Theodore's response, limiting his ability to dismiss the option without accountability. The committee convened in the hospital's main conference room, tension palpable as Theodore entered noticeably disheveled after spending another night beside his rapidly declining son. His customary commanding presence had diminished, replaced by the desperate energy of a man watching his child and reputation simultaneously disintegrate. Dr. Richards presented the dual treatment option with methodical precision, explaining the medical science without initially revealing the donor's identity. Theodore showed first signs of interest, asking technical questions about success probabilities until the doctor finally displayed Jamal's photo on the presentation screen. "This is your miracle donor," she stated firmly. "The same child you've repeatedly rejected." Theodore's face contorted through multiple emotions: shock, disbelief, anger, and finally the beginning glimmers of shame. Before he could respond, the hospital's chief of medicine informed him that Jackson's condition had become terminal. The machines were now effectively keeping him alive, with complete system failure imminent without intervention. Theodore attempted to redirect the conversation, suggesting transferring Jackson to a private facility with less public scrutiny. But the committee members unanimously confirmed what the medical team had already determined: the boy was too unstable to move. Even Theodore's unlimited financial resources couldn't change this fundamental reality. While the adults debated, Jamal regained consciousness in the pediatric ward, immediately removing his IV despite nurses' protests. The moment staff attention diverted to another patient's emergency, he slipped from his bed with singular determination to reach Jackson before time expired. Despite his weakened condition, Jamal navigated through the hospital, using routes Miguel had previously shared: determination, compensating for his physical frailty. Outside the hospital, community members who recognized Jamal from news coverage facilitated his progress, creating diversions to distract security personnel at critical junctures. A food service worker held open a service elevator. A volunteer directed him through less monitored corridors, and a nursing student deliberately looked away as he passed a checkpoint. These small acts of resistance against an unjust system accumulated, creating a path for the determined child. Inside the executive conference room, Theodore's final defenses crumbled as Dr. Richards displayed Jackson's latest test results, alongside video documentation of his improving vital signs during his brief interactions with Jamal. The correlation was undeniable, suggesting some preliminary healing had already begun through their limited contact. The billionaire's carefully constructed worldview collided catastrophically with irrefutable evidence that his prejudice was killing his son. Security alarms interrupted the tense meeting, indicating unauthorized access to Jackson's restricted wing. Multiple guards faced the unprecedented moral dilemma of following Walter Jenkins' discriminatory protocols versus the growing awareness that preventing Jamal's access might constitute active participation in a child's death. Several chose conscience over orders, creating deliberate gaps in the security cordon. Walter himself intercepted Jamal at the final checkpoint, physically blocking the corridor leading to Jackson's room. The security chief's expression reflected the dangerous, cornered rage of a man watching his authority crumble, hand moving toward his taser as he advanced on the exhausted child. From the nearby conference room emerged Theodore Wright himself, witnessing the confrontation with newly opened eyes. The tableau before him crystallized everything the ethics committee had been discussing. The systematic barriers erected specifically to keep this child from saving his son. Something fundamental shifted in Theodore's perspective as he watched Walter's threatening advance toward the weakened boy who had repeatedly risked everything to help Jackson despite being treated as inherently criminal-based, solely on his race and economic status. "Stand down," Theodore commanded with quiet intensity. Walter hesitated, torn between habit and hierarchy. "Sir, this is the trespasser I've been protecting your son from," he explained, gesturing dismissively toward Jamal. "This street kid keeps breaking protocol." Theodore moved between them, physically shielding Jamal from Walter's aggression. "This child has shown more humanity than either of us," the billionaire responded, voice breaking. "I was too blind to see it." Theodore dismissed Walter permanently before escorting Jamal personally to Jackson's room, where his son lay surrounded by last-resort life support equipment. The monitors showed critically deteriorating values across all major systems. Jamal approached cautiously, placing his small hand over Jackson's. The simple contact produced an immediate, measurable response, a slight improvement in heart rhythm that every medical professional in the room observed with astonishment. "Dad, please let him help me," Jackson whispered, briefly conscious enough to recognize both his father and Jamal. The moment marked Theodore's breaking point. Decades of ingrained prejudice crumbled against his son's simple plea and the undeniable evidence before him. The billionaire fell to his knees beside Jamal, tears streaming openly down his face as he begged for forgiveness. "I was wrong about everything," Theodore admitted, decades of arrogance dissolving in the face of his son's imminent death. "Please help him if you can." The moment of reconciliation was interrupted when both boys' conditions simultaneously deteriorated. Jackson's monitors blaring critical alerts while Jamal collapsed beside the bed, blood streaming from his nose at an alarming rate. Dr. Richards rushed in with an emergency medical team, quickly assessing both children's rapidly declining status. "There's no time for proper procedure," she announced with clinical urgency. "Treatment must begin immediately, or we lose them both." The experimental dual treatment required parental consent for both children, creating one final obstacle. Jamal had no legal guardian since his grandmother's death. In a moment that would later be described as his redemption, Theodore made a monumental decision, signing temporary emergency guardianship papers for Jamal alongside treatment consent for Jackson. With trembling hands that had signed billion-dollar development deals without hesitation, Theodore authorized the unprecedented procedure with the simple statement, "Save them both." As the dual treatment began, the clock showed less than 3 hours remaining in Jackson's original 72-hour prognosis. The experimental treatment connecting both boys' circulatory systems began under intense scrutiny from Boston Memorial's finest medical specialists. The procedure, unprecedented in medical literature, required microscopic precision as specialized equipment extracted specific components from Jamal's blood before carefully introducing them into Jackson's system, while simultaneously filtering excessive elements from Jamal's circulation. Monitoring equipment surrounded both children, documenting every subtle physiological response, while medical teams stood ready to intervene at the first sign of rejection or complication. Outside the specialized treatment room, Theodore Wright maintained a solitary vigil. his imposing frame curled uncomfortably in a standard hospital chair, a visual representation of his diminished stature. The billionaire's carefully cultivated public image had shattered completely, leaving only a father confronting a lifetime of prejudice that had nearly cost his son's life. Each passing medical professional witnessed the transformation as Theodore's features reflected the painful introspection of a man recognizing the damage his worldview had caused. Throughout the hospital, administrative dynamics shifted rapidly as board members attempted to distance themselves from previous discriminatory practices they had tacitly enabled. Several executives who had prioritized Theodore's financial contributions over ethical concerns suddenly discovered passionate commitments to equitable healthcare access and community inclusion initiatives drafting policy revisions, with convenient amnesia regarding their previous positions. Outside the hospital, an impromptu community vigil grew organically, bringing together people across racial and economic divides in support of both children. Residents from Jamal's former Roxbury neighborhood stood alongside Beacon Hill families, sharing stories and finding common ground in their concern for the two boys whose conditions had inadvertently exposed deeply entrenched social inequities. Local religious leaders offered prayers while community organizers distributed information about systematic healthcare disparities affecting minority communities. The remarkable gathering caught media attention, dominating local coverage and spreading to national networks as an inspiring counterpoint to the initial controversy. Inside the treatment room, the delicate procedure progressed for several hours before the first significant complication arose. Both boys' vital signs began destabilizing simultaneously, their interconnected systems experiencing cascading disruptions that triggered multiple emergency alarms. Medical teams rushed to intervene as first Jackson then Jamal flatlined their monitoring systems, showing the terrifying straight lines indicating absent heartbeats. Controlled chaos ensued as resuscitation protocols commenced specialized equipment delivering precisely calibrated electrical impulses while medication combinations attempted to restart their hearts. Tense minutes passed without response, medical professionals exchanging increasingly desperate glances as standard interventions failed to produce results. Dr. Richards refused to concede defeat, adjusting treatment parameters and demanding continued resuscitation efforts beyond standard timeframes. These are not standard cases, she insisted when a colleague suggested calling time of death. Their physiologies are unique, we continue until I say otherwise. Her determination proved justified when monitoring systems detected the first faint electrical impulses returning to both circulatory systems within moments of each other. Gradually, heartbeats stabilized, as though the boys had synchronized their return from the brink. The medical team's relief remained cautious. Both children stabilized, but remained unconscious, their bodies traumatized from both their conditions and the experimental treatment. As the crisis stabilized, Theodore confronted Walter Jenkins about the systematic racism in hospital security protocols that had repeatedly prevented Jamal from receiving medical attention and offering assistance to Jackson. "I gave you permission to protect my son Theodore," stated with quiet intensity. "I never authorized you to dehumanize children based on their skin color or economic status. That came from your prejudice and mine." Walter initially attempted to defend his actions with rehearsed justifications about standard security protocols and statistical risk factors, but his arguments withered under Theodore's newfound moral clarity. Faced with his own complicity in a system he had unquestioningly enforced, Walter began experiencing his own transformation, witnessing firsthand how his biased security practices had directly endangered lives he was supposed to protect. Media coverage of the unprecedented medical procedure and Theodore Wright's apparent change of heart dominated news cycles nationally. The billionaire's public acknowledgement of his past discriminatory practices and pledge to implement comprehensive reforms throughout his business empire resonated particularly with corporate leaders facing similar reckonings. His statement that profit never justifies prejudice became an unlikely rallying cry for corporate responsibility advocates. Inside the recovery room, both boys remained in medically induced comas as doctors monitored their interlinked healing processes. Dr. Richards explained to Theodore that the experimental procedure had created a unique medical phenomenon. The boys now shared complementary antibody profiles, their systems essentially teaching each other how to function properly. Jackson showed the first signs of recovery, his brain activity gradually normalizing as specialized monitoring equipment tracked his neurological functioning. Theodore divided his time equally between both children, reading stories at Jamal's bedside with the same tenderness he showed his biological son. Hospital staff, who had known the billionaire's previous dismissive attitude toward service personnel, noted his transformed interactions, genuinely thanking custodial staff, learning nurses' names, and acknowledging everyone, contributing to the boys' care regardless of their position. As dawn broke on what should have been Jackson's final day, according to the original 72-hour prognosis, the medical team began gradually reducing his sedation. Theodore sat between both beds, holding one child's hand in each of his own, when Jackson's eyes fluttered open, consciousness returning with remarkable clarity. "The boy who saved me," Jackson whispered immediately, gaze finding Jamal in the adjacent bed. "Is he okay?" Theodore promised his son that everything would be different now, explaining in age-appropriate terms how Jamal's extraordinary courage had transformed not just Jackson's medical prognosis, but his father's entire appropriate worldview. Jackson listened with unusual solemnity, occasionally glancing at his still unconscious savior with obvious concern. The medical team maintained a tense vigil as they waited for Jamal to regain consciousness, growing increasingly concerned as monitoring equipment showed irregular patterns in his neurological responses. While Jackson continued steady improvement, Jamal's systems appeared to be rejecting aspects of the treatment, his smaller body struggling to find new equilibrium after the procedure. Dr. Richards ordered additional diagnostic scans, discovering concerning inflammation around Jamal's vital organs, suggesting his body was fighting the very intervention that had saved Jackson. The final crisis emerged suddenly. Jamal's systems began systematic rejection, his vital signs destabilizing, as monitors displayed cascading failures across multiple physiological systems. Medical staff rushed to counter the rejection with specialized anti-inflammatory protocols and targeted immunosuppressants fighting to stabilize the child, whose selflessness had already saved one life. Theodore refused to leave Jamal's bedside during the crisis, maintaining physical contact with the boy's hand while making a promise that surprised even himself. "Wake up, son," the billionaire whispered, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. "I'll make sure you never have to live on the streets again." The sincerity of his promise marked the completion of Theodore's transformation from prejudiced mogul to a man recognizing his responsibility to both children, the biological son he had previously valued above all others, and the homeless child whose courage had taught him the true meaning of humanity. 3 days after the groundbreaking procedure, medical staff gathered anxiously around Jamal's bed, as monitoring equipment indicated changes in brain activity, suggestive of returning consciousness. Theodore and Jackson remained constant companions during the vigil, the billionaire having refused all business calls while his son recovered enough strength to sit in a wheelchair beside Jamal's bed. When Jamal's eyes finally opened, confusion quickly gave way to concern, as his first whispered words revealed his extraordinary character: "Is Jackson okay?" The simple question triggered emotional reactions throughout the room, even veteran medical professionals wiping away tears at the selflessness of a child who, upon waking from near death, thought first of another's well-being. Jackson wheeled himself closer, gripping Jamal's hand with newfound strength. "You saved my life," he stated with absolute conviction. "Dad says we share special blood now, so that makes us blood brothers for real." Theodore nodded confirmation, explaining in simplified terms how the procedure had created a unique biological connection between the boys, their blood chemistry now sharing complementary elements that had stabilized both conditions. Medical researchers had already documented the extraordinary case for scientific journals, predicting revolutionary implications for treating numerous rare blood disorders previously considered untreatable. The emotional reunion extended beyond the hospital room as news of Jamal's recovery spread throughout the facility. Miguel visited during his break, bringing handmade cards from the maintenance staff who had helped Jamal navigate the hospital. Several security officers who had chosen conscience over Walter's discriminatory orders came to apologize personally for not intervening sooner. Even Dr. Phillips, the controversial specialist whose failed treatment had worsened Jackson's condition, visited briefly to acknowledge that his experimental approach had been motivated more by potential publicity than sound medical science. As both boys continued their recovery, Theodore Wright underwent his own transformation beyond the hospital walls. The Billionaire announced the creation of the Jamal Davis Medical Foundation with an initial endowment of $100 million dedicated to eliminating racial disparities in healthcare access and treatment outcomes. The foundation's first initiative established free neighborhood clinics in underserved communities, beginning with Jamal's former Roxbury neighborhood, where his grandmother had been denied critical care. Boston Memorial Hospital implemented comprehensive new anti-discrimination policies with Theodore's financial support, including mandatory bias training for all staff and anonymous reporting systems for patients experiencing discrimination. Walter Jenkins, following extensive counseling and education, surprisingly became an advocate for reformed security practices, leading specialized training on eliminating bias in threat assessment and patient interactions. His personal acknowledgement of how prejudice had clouded his professional judgment resonated particularly with fellow security personnel resistant to policy changes. Against the advice of his remaining business associates and public relations team, Theodore initiated legal proceedings to formally adopt Jamal despite significant social backlash from wealthy connections who viewed the decision as inappropriate or publicity-seeking. "I'm not looking for approval or praise," Theodore informed those who questioned his decision. "I'm simply doing what's right for a child who deserves a home and showed more humanity than most adults I know." 2 weeks after their shared procedure, both boys had recovered sufficiently for limited public appearance at a carefully managed press conference. Theodore used the platform to publicly acknowledge how deeply ingrained racism had nearly cost his son's life, speaking with humbling candor about his personal journey from prejudice to enlightenment. "I would have sacrificed anything to save my son except my own bigotry," he admitted to assembled journalists. "It took an 8-year-old homeless child to show me that my wealth meant nothing compared to his moral courage." The press conference generated international coverage, sparking uncomfortable but necessary conversations about how prejudice infiltrated healthcare, housing, education, and economic opportunities in ways privileged individuals could easily overlook until crisis forced confrontation. As weeks turned to months, both boys underwent physical therapy together, their friendship deepening beyond their shared medical experience. Jackson introduced Jamal to educational opportunities previously unimaginable, while Jamal helped Jackson understand privilege and how to use it constructively for community benefit. Theodore's business practices underwent comprehensive transformation, with substantial investments in the Roxbury community he had previously targeted for gentrification. Affordable housing developments replaced luxury condominium plans, while local businesses received support to prevent economic displacement of longtime residents. Community members who initially viewed Theodore's conversion with justified skepticism gradually witnessed genuine commitment to sustainable, equitable development practices that prioritized existing neighborhood preservation. On a crisp autumn day mirroring the weather, when Jackson first collapsed, Jamal visited his grandmother's modest grave, accompanied by Theodore and Jackson. The boy knelt beside the simple marker, placing fresh flowers while telling her how their special blood had ultimately saved 2 lives and transformed countless others. "You were right about our blood being special," Jamal whispered, "but you never said it would find me a new family too." Medical research based on the boy's groundbreaking treatment created breakthrough protocols for numerous rare diseases previously considered untreatable. Dr. Richards received prestigious recognition for her determination to pursue evidence-based medicine despite institutional resistance, establishing new ethical frameworks for pediatric treatment that explicitly addressed discriminatory barriers to care. 6 months after the procedure that saved both their lives, Jamal and Jackson attended school together for the first time. Theodore found himself fighting unexpected battles against subtle discrimination within the prestigious private academy, confronting administrators who questioned whether Jamal could adapt to our rigorous standards despite testing that demonstrated exceptional academic potential. These encounters opened Theodore's eyes further to educational inequities he had previously never considered, leading to substantial donations for school districts serving minority communities and scholarship programs increasing diversity within elite institutions. As the boys entered their teenage years, they established a youth advocacy program, encouraging young people to recognize and challenge systemic inequalities in their own communities. Their personal story of transcending racial and economic barriers inspired participants to examine their own prejudices while developing practical strategies for creating more equitable systems. The program eventually expanded nationally with thousands of young participants implementing community improvement projects, addressing healthcare, education, and housing disparities. The epilogue of their extraordinary journey culminated with Theodore Wright testifying before congressional committees investigating healthcare discrimination and economic inequality. The billionaire who had once exploited system inequalities for profit now advocated passionately for structural reforms, bringing both statistical evidence and personal testimony about how deeply ingrained prejudice had nearly cost his profit. Son's life. "My son almost died because I valued some lives less than others," Theodore stated for the official record. "That changes today not just for my family but for our entire healthcare system. No child should receive different care based on their skin color or economic status." Watching the testimony via live stream from their home, Jamal and Jackson exchanged knowing glances. Now teenagers bonded by shared blood chemistry and the profound journey that had transformed them from strangers on opposite sides of the society's divisions to brothers in every way that mattered. Their story had rippled outward, challenging countless individuals to examine their own biases and inspiring systemic changes that would benefit generations to come, all because one homeless child had found the courage to challenge deeply rooted prejudice with simple human compassion. What would you have done in Jamal's position? Would you have risked everything to help someone whose father treated you with such contempt? Comment below with your thoughts on what true courage means. Like this video if you believe that children often show us the way to a more compassionate world. Subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories about everyday heroes who change lives through extraordinary acts of kindness. Share this story with someone who needs a reminder that love and compassion can truly overcome the deepest divides. Thank you for watching, and remember that the most powerful changes often begin with the smallest acts of courage. This powerful story reminds us that prejudice can blind us to life-saving connections. Theodore's transformation teaches us that even deeply ingrained biases can be overcome when confronted with undeniable humanity. The walls we build between communities, racial, economic, or social, can literally cost lives as they nearly did for both Jackson and Jamal. True healing often requires connecting across these artificial divides. The courage displayed by Jamal demonstrates that compassion knows no socioeconomic boundaries. Despite facing discrimination and rejection, he persisted in trying to help someone in need, showing wisdom beyond his years. His actions remind us that the most vulnerable among us often possess extraordinary strength of character. The medical professionals who fought institutional barriers showcase how individual moral courage can challenge unjust systems. Dr. Richards and Miguel chose ethical practice over convenience or career advancement, creating pathways for justice within broken structures. Perhaps most importantly, this story highlights how children often see clearly what adults have been conditioned to ignore. Jackson recognized Jamal's friendship and worth immediately uncontaminated by the prejudice his father had embraced. The purity of their connection ultimately healed not just physical ailments, but the spiritual sickness of discrimination that had infected their community. Sometimes our greatest teachers are those we've been taught to overlook. Have you ever witnessed someone's prejudice prevent them from receiving help they desperately needed? Or have you experienced a moment when someone from an entirely different background showed you unexpected kindness? Share your on times is Evan, Rycom experiences in the comments below. Your story might inspire someone facing similar challenges. If this tale of two boys breaking through barriers of race and class touched your heart, hit that like button to help more people discover it. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that challenge us to look beyond superficial differences and recognize our shared humanity. And please share this video with someone who might need a reminder that compassion can overcome even the deepest societal divides. Thank you for listening with an open heart. And remember that sometimes the most profound healing begins when we're brave enough to see each other's true worth beyond the labels society has assigned us.